and welcome to our newest edition of NetGalley and BookTrib present 15 Minutes with, a Meryl Moss Media production. We are excited to welcome editor, ghostwriter, and Sunday Times bestselling author Kate Moore. Kate is the author of more than 10 books in an array of genres. We've got history, children's books, humor, so much more. Her books include Scone with the Wind, Roses Are Red, a book for lovers, Felix the Railway Cat, and most recently releasing on May 2nd is The Radium Girls, a true story about one of America's early 20th century scandals. So we can't wait to find out more. Welcome, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited about this new book. Tell us a little bit about the Radium Girls and the story that we're reading here, and some of the characters that we're meeting as well.
Okay, well, the most important thing to say is it's a true story. So this is real history, and some of the things that happen to them are so fantastical that you kind of can't believe that this is genuine people that experience these things.
Okay.
But the Radium Girls, for those who haven't heard of them before, because it is in some ways quite a little known piece of American history, they were the women in the First World War and the 1920s who used to paint numbers on watches with radium paint, which was luminous, so it would glow in the dark.
Okay.
And they were taught to lip point, so to put their paintbrushes between their lips and kind of almost suck the paint off to make a really fine point for the tiny numbers on the watches. And what happened to them was that radium is highly radioactive.
Right.
So they're essentially ingesting a highly radioactive substance. Radium at the time when they were painting was believed to be a kind of health boon. So they didn't think there was anything wrong in what was happening to them. They loved the job. But over the years, they start to get sick, and the book chronicles their fight for justice. So standing up against the company who has not only, doomed them to die, but also the companies acted appallingly once it became clear that the job of dial painting was one that was poisoning women. They acted appallingly, and the women were shunned, and so it was a real battle that the women had on their hands. And what the book does is bring to life those real women at the centre of this, incredible fight that they had, this courageous journey. So we meet Grace Fryer and we meet Catherine Donahue. And what I wanted to do with the book was to write it as narrative non-fiction. So it reads like a novel, and these women are not just names in a history book. Yes. You know that, Grace had lots of brothers and sisters and worked in a bank, and she wore pearls and, was incredibly courageous. You know that Catherine had friends who would come and bring her a roast chicken. You learn that Edna had a little terrier dog. And so what I wanted to do was to bring them to life as real women, basically. And this is a tribute to them and their courage.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so interested in hearing maybe your background in this, or how you got inspired by this story to write this book. How did this kind of come to you and become a story you wanted to tell?
Well, I first learned of the girl's story through a play called These Shining Lives by Melanie Marnich, and I was directing it. So that's how I learned the story. The play is a brilliant play about the Ottawa women from Illinois, and as the director, I was researching as much as I could because I felt a responsibility to do justice to these real people that we were portraying on stage. And I read the other books that are out there. There are a couple of others that feature the story, but there was no book that actually did what I've done in bringing the women to the fore and telling their story in a engaging, readable, very accessible way. So rather than it being a kind of a book about the law changes that they brought about, or the science to it, this is very much a human story. So having realized there was no book that did it, I just thought it's an incredible story. I think the women deserve us to remember them and get to know them, and so that's why I was inspired to write the book, because I thought there was a kind of, they'd been overlooked basically, and I wanted to redress the balance.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what about the way you went ahead and researched and wrote the book? Did you find that the process was any different than some of your other books? I know you do children's books as well. So are there differences in the process? Is it really just generally writing the same way, or you go about things differently?
Well, I think particularly with this book, there was an enormous amount of research.
Sure.
And, I'm fortunate that there were records left behind. There are court documents, there are newspaper interviews with the girls, there are collections with their letters and diaries. So it was a huge research project from that regard. And in comparison to my other books, certainly the most detailed book I've ever undertaken.
Right.
In terms of a research project. And, one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life personally, to come to America. You can probably hear from my voice, I'm not from America, yes. I'm from London in England. So I travelled to the US for a month, and I travelled all around, walked in the women's footsteps, went to their houses, met their families. And it was an incredible experience to do that and try and bring the women to life in uncovering those archival, the archival documents, but also the oral history that I was able to, the families very generously shared with me their own memories of the people that feature in the book.
Certainly, yeah. Now, what about, you write in a number of genres, as I mentioned in your opening. Do you have a favorite one to write in? Are some more challenging than others? How do you approach those?
I mean, I would probably the thing that unifies them all is I have done some gift books, as you mentioned, but what I love is narrative nonfiction.
Okay.
So whether I'm writing about Felix the Railway Cat or whether I'm writing about the Radium Girls, what I want to do is to tell a story. And that is, when I talked earlier about the other books that are available, they're not a story. So I like to write in a way that, has cliffhangers for readers so that they don't want to put the book down. They've got to read on to the next chapter. I want them to feel that whoever I'm writing about, the reader is walking in step with that person.
Right.
So I very much come from it, almost in a way. I mentioned the theatre background, but it's almost like being an actor or something and taking on their personality and imagining, walking in step with them. And so that's what I try to do with all my books. So I think that's the unifying kind of feature to them all.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Now, as you write each new project, do you just go for you with the next idea that you've thought about? Do you have like a list of projects that you work from, or is it just, here's the next story, I want to do this story, and then you go ahead and write it? How do your ideas come to you?
It's a real mix, I would say. I'm in the fortunate position that because, particularly in the UK, I'm kind of known within the publishing industry because I used to be an editorial director of Penguin Random House.
Okay.
So sometimes some of the projects are other editors in publishing houses who come to me and say, for example, we've just signed up Felix the Railway Cat and we need a writer to write her story. So that one came about from an editor saying, coming to me and, I was attached to the project.
Yeah,
other things like the Radium Girls or some other stuff I've got coming up is me thinking there's an amazing story in this and making it happen, basically.
Right, okay. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about your experience? You mentioned you did work for a publisher, but what about your experience as an author working with traditional publishing? Is it something that you've found, works for you? Have you ever considered outside publishing, like indie publishing or anything like that?
I mean, I think there's merits in all kinds of things. I mean, as you say, because of my publishing background, I'm probably more open to traditional publishing, and I think particularly working in non-fiction where, speaking from a purely commercial point of view, in non-fiction you can write a proposal, you can pitch it to a publisher, and you can get a deal before you've written the whole book. So in terms of the finances, you can essentially get paid to write it, if you see what I mean. That, because they're going to give you money on, on the signature payment, and so you're being paid to then spend the rest of your time working. So I think that has a huge benefit as opposed to self-publishing where you have to get everything done. You're kind of doing all the outlay first. But obviously your royalties can then be higher, if you've chosen to go down that route. So I think there's merits and kind of drawbacks in both, probably.
Definitely. What about your kind of background in general? How did you know that, writing, this was what you wanted to do? Was it something that you just realized this is where your heart lies, or something you've always wanted to do? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved writing, and when I was kind of, right from a little girl, and kind of, when I was a teenager, I was writing kind of, horror novels and that sort of thing, to my parents' dismay, I think. And yeah, I mean, kind of, so I always did write, and I think it's, for some people, obviously, they're really lucky, or they're really determined, and they get a deal, straight out the bat, and they're off, and that's what they do. For me, I went into publishing because I love books and I love words, and my focus as an editor was very much on the text. And one of my colleagues said I was all about making the sentences sing. So even when I was working in an editor, I was very much concerned about the actual text and the words. And then, yeah, I think, as you say, it's something that's kind of dear to your heart. And even when I was working in-house, I was still writing as well. And sometimes the projects that I would get involved with, I was doing as part of my work, and I was writing and editing. And so there comes a point where you make that leap and you say, right, I'm going to do it full time now. And as you mentioned at the start, I'm a ghostwriter as well. So I'm in the fortunate position that I'm not always kind of reliant on me having that light bulb moment.
Right.
I have the privilege of helping other people to tell their incredible life stories, which is an aspect of the job that I really enjoy, and enables me to write and tell stories. And I can think of stories like the Radium Girls that I want to tell myself, but also get to meet people that have extraordinary life stories and work with them as well.
That's amazing. Can you tell us about your other books? I know we talked for a moment about Felix the Railway Cat, but can you talk about like Scone with the Wind, and the other one that I mentioned was Roses Are Red. Can you talk about a few different of your other projects?
Yeah, sure. So both of those are gift books, so very different from that narrative style that I was mentioning earlier. So Scone with the Wind is essentially kind of cookery meets literature, basically. Okay. So it's got recipes in it, and it's full of kind of puns. So you mentioned Scone with the Wind, and I obviously can't think of a single one off the top of my head right now, but I think I wrote it about 3 years ago, so it's not fresh. And I kind of wrote the kind of humorous, pun-tastic descriptions.
Okay.
Things. And Roses for Red is a romance guide. So intended for kind of people on Valentine's Day. It's got, swoon-worthy tips for great gift ideas and that sort of thing. So it's very much more, it's kind of box texts and kind of bullet lists, and rather than a flowing narrative, it's kind of, quirky ideas and tips and things like that.
That's fun. And then Felix the Railway Cat actually just came out in February. And that's a children's book?
Children could read it. It is actually pitched as adult, but there's nothing, as you do, it's family friendly. We're very pleased actually because it's just become a Sunday Times bestseller.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased. And Felix the Railway Cat is a cat who lives at Huddersfield train station in Yorkshire in the UK. And she is a social media star. So she has 100,000 Facebook friends.
Oh my gosh.
And Felix the Railway Cat is her life story. So how did a cat come to live at the station, the impact she has on the community, and it's full of kind of, warm-hearted stories and, tales about the time she helped an autistic child, tales about the time she helped a runaway boy. And it's just about how incredible the cat is, and humorous and joyful, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. So 2017 has just started, but the Radium Girls doesn't come out until May. What about following up after the Radium Girls? Do you have other projects in the works, other things going on for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I've got a couple of ghosting projects underway at the moment, and I'm excited about those. They're both in the true crime
Oh,
genre. So
wonderful.
one of them is called Catching a Serial Killer,
Okay.
and it is written with a policeman called a detective superintendent, and it is about a kind of cat and mouse chase to bring a serial killer to justice. So
Okay.
that's Detective Superintendent Stephen Fulcher. It's his book, and it's coming out in June in the UK.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
wonderful.
so it's I've literally just finished it on Friday, so it's hot
Well,
off the press.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, that's
So
wonderful.
yeah, and I've got a couple of other things kind of in that genre that are coming up, and also thinking, I'm really excited about what might happen with the Radium Girls, and I'd love to do something else that is along those lines of kind of historical, an incredible historical true story where I can really bring those characters to life, and so that the reader feels they're not 100 years old. These women
Absolutely.
are, one of my publishers kind of said that the women are like friends, and that's
Yeah.
what I wanted people to feel when they read the book, that they were real people that they could
Well, it
identify with.
sounds like such an interesting story. It almost sounds like something Amazon could do like a short run with or something. They had that other. I'm blanking on the name of it, but they did have another historical female show that I watched, and now I can't think of the name. But it was so good, and it feels like that could be something that could fit in there. So maybe a lot of
Yeah,
potential too.
I think so, definitely. I mean, the thing I'm most excited about is just reminding people that, these
They
women
existed.
sacrifice so much, and
Yeah.
I'm excited for people to get to know their real story and what they really suffered and endured.
That's wonderful. Well, we're really excited about it, and we can't thank you enough for joining us today and
Thank
chatting all
you.
about the Radium Girls and so much more. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Bye.